with a controlled media, you can inject propaganda into the population on a daily basis and indoctrinate them all. You can hammer away pumping out the same messages. COVID's going to kill you. The vaccine's 100% safe and effective. Global warming is going to kill us all. Mass immigration and diversity are our greatest strengths. And if you can control what people hear, very soon you can control what many people think. Many people, not all.
We are the Behavioural Insights team, the world's first nudge unit. We generate and apply behavioural insights to help people lead better lives and support communities.
The government set up a unit to manipulate you in 2010, the Behavioural Insights team known as the Nudge Unit. Its sole purpose is to work out how to get you to do what they want. With COVID, they decided fear was the best tactic.
Let's bring you more on the latest infection numbers and the number of people who've died.
Yes, and the most shocking thing actually is the number of people who have died.
The United Kingdom's death toll from the coronavirus has risen by 1/5, that's 20%.
The latest number of deaths in the UK is higher than any daily total reported by either Italy or Spain.
13,258 people are in hospital with coronavirus, and 28,734 people have died.
They weaponised fear against you to terrify you, so they could get you to stay in your house, wear a mask, be in a bubble, take the shot, take the vaccine. Even though the data showed as early as May 2020, just 3 months in, that for the healthy people under 55, there was minimal risk, but they shut the country down anyway.
I think we've been taken over by what's becoming a totalitarian state, which is based on very bad science, in fact false science, and there's a fraud behind a lot of it.
And they said the vaccine was 100% safe and effective.
Well, Mr. Speaker, let me first say that I believe COVID vaccines are indeed safe and effective.
The vaccines have all been through and met the necessary safety and quality standards.
I've just had a vaccine for COVID.
Vaccines being rolled out in the UK are not just safe, but they make you safe. They're saving lives and protecting people.
It's not just your own life you'll be saving, it's other people's lives too.
Trust the science and get on with it.
This is a safe and effective vaccine.
Except it wasn't, was it? The media played along and only told one side of the story and shut down many respected scientists who did not agree with the approach and wanted to warn us about the possible COVID vaccine harm. But they didn't manage to silence everyone.
But what is almost certainly, and if you allow me to say this, LaQuesta, what my own research has found, and this is something that is probably a likely contributory factor, is that the COVID mRNA vaccines do carry a cardiovascular risk. And I've actually called for the suspension of this pending an inquiry because there's a lot of uncertainty at the moment about what's causing the excess deaths.
Yeah, someone at the BBC booked Dr. Malhotra to talk about statins, but he was determined to let us know about the vaccine harms. The all-party parliamentary group on the pandemic response heard about the terrible effects of weaponising fear. Have a read of The State of Fear by Laura Dodsworth. And of course, they kept hammering away about the danger of the far right.
That's from the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. He says this, I conclude rather unsurprisingly that there is a greater violent threat from the far right. Just would like to pick up on that point because MI5, 67% of terror attacks on their books since 2018 are Islamist attacks. 3/4 of all MI5 cases are from Islamists. The Batley Grammar School protest, that wasn't the far right. The anti-Semitism boom we've seen in Britain since October 7th, that wasn't the far right. David Amos was murdered, not by somebody from the far right. Mike Freer forced out of politics by an arson attack, that wasn't the far right. Just Stop Oil, presumably, they're not the far right.
Fear again. Every announcement they make, the far right gets a special mention. Where are this far right? You know, the real fascists. Because by the government's own security services, they tell them that 90% of the people on the terror watch list, 90% are followers of Islam. That's 40,000 potential terrorists they would know about. Not to mention the ones they don't know about. Are you scared? You have
no, I'm not scared. No?
And all the undocumented illegal immigrants that they have no idea where they are because they've done a runner. The government has lost them. They have no idea how many of them are criminals, terrorists. We never hear about that.
In 1943, the following directive was issued from party headquarters to all communists in the United States. It read, When certain obstructionists become too irritating, label them after suitable build-ups as fascist or Nazi or anti-Semitic, and use the prestige of anti-fascist and tolerance organizations to discredit them. In the public mind, constantly associate those who oppose us with those names which already have a bad smell. The association will, after enough repetition, become fact in the public mind.
That's right. These tactics are nothing new. Of course, our leaders are frightened and clueless. They don't know what to do about the real threat of Islam.
We believe that life begins at death. We don't care about death. We love death.
And they don't know what to do about the threat of left-wing extremist ideologies. Well, some of them don't know what to do, and there's others elected that actually believe in these extremist destructive ideologies. And some of them want you to actually believe that taxing us more is really going to save the planet, regardless of what China and India are doing with fossil fuels.
We've cut CO2 by 44% on 1990 levels in this country.
Of course, not everyone is susceptible to this indoctrination. So more pressure is needed.
If we continue down this path, we will enter a form of tyranny where certain views, certain opinions, certain people are deemed acceptable where others are not, based on what? It seems very arbitrary. That, to me, is terrifying.
You see, another piece of the architecture of a totalitarian state is to use the citizens to turn on each other. After years of increasing social isolation, people retreat into the online world, building echo chambers, polarised, angry, faceless discourse. We were all potential fertile ground for mass formation. The stay-at-home mandates during the COVID madness was perhaps the last piece of this. And lonely, socially isolated individuals, often stuck in meaningless jobs, carrying the fear and anxiety of the monsters created by the state. In this case, the fear of COVID. Frustrated by ever-increasing restrictions on their freedoms and the destabilising effect of ever-changing rules. Well, with the right nudging, they can be made to do pretty much anything.
Says you may not come within 2 metres of me.
I'm walking past you.
Because you're a dickhead without a mask. You're a cunt putting people's lives at risk.
Asked her to wear a fucking mask. Like, seriously, woman who won't wear your mask, who don't wear your gloves, who don't practice social distancing. Wear your fucking mask.
How else do you think people were made to come out on the streets, on their doorsteps, and clap for the NHS when their appointments and treatments were being cancelled? How else do you think the people were turned into zealots? They turned on those who did not believe. They turned on the people who would not comply.
What happens when they, your neighbours, start breaking lockdown rules, with the police receiving 200,000 tip-offs?
You see, people brainwashed during COVID. People only given one message, continuously given that message by controlled media. Lonely, socially isolated, frightened people. People who perhaps have little meaning in their jobs will take up the cause for the state. These people are desperate for meaning. They're desperate and they crave a master. They want to be told what to do, and they see forcing others to comply as their virtue. These zealots get a meaning from their righteous cause. They become part of a group. The antidote to the social isolation and the loneliness. But here's the problem. Just as the state manipulates increasingly lonely, socially isolated, anxious and frustrated people, with social media, others can do that too. Sometimes the government let it run. Extinction Rebellion, just stop oil. Why do they let it run? Because it's broadly in the direction they want things to go. And sometimes they let it run because they're frightened to confront it, like the Black Lives Matter marches or the transgender movement, even though they know it's nonsense, it's dangerous. And sometimes they let it run for decades, as with Islam, incompatible with Western liberal democracy, because they're too frightened and too clueless to confront it.
That window's gone.
And now there's a fifth column, agitating on the streets, calling for jihad, calling for the extermination of Jews, and there are thousands and thousands who join these marches who have been manipulated in just the same way.
So I just noticed the signs that you've got from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. What does that mean?
Well, it's quite self-explanatory. It needs to be.
Well, it's a little bit more complicated than that, isn't it? Because I guess what I mean is, how would that come about? What would happen to the Israelis, etc.?
I don't.
I'm trying to think of how to word it. Isn't it just as self-explanatory as the area of land? It's Palestine's land.
What are you guys out here protesting for?
No comment.
Why are you guys out here today?
Speak to the organizers.
Why can't I wanted to ask you though.
Do you know what NY is doing? About what? About Israel. Why are we protesting here?
Palestine will be free!
I wish I was more educated. I'm not either.
Oh.
Yeah. I don't think it would be a good idea if we...
Why are you guys protesting?
Just to be a part of the cause.
And what's the cause?
Yeah, I'm not the right person to talk to.
So why are you guys protesting today?
I don't want to talk to press, I'm sorry.
They don't really want to talk. Why are you guys protesting here today?
I don't want to do this, sorry.
Do you know why you are protesting here today?
Yes.
And what is that reason?
No comment.
Build a new workers' party, a socialist alternative to Sunak and Starmer for a socialist intifada.
Yeah.
What's a socialist intifada?
If I'm being honest with you, I just got this at the stand over there.
Okay.
I don't actually know the definition of the word intifada.
Okay.
But, I mean...
Do any of you know the definition of the word intifada? Stop bombing Gaza, that makes sense. What about that one? Yeah. And what does that mean?
Well, it means that it's. I'm definitely not the person to talk to about this.
The claimed cause is to stop a so-called genocide of Palestinians. They believe in the cause. They can't name the river or the sea, but they march anyway. They didn't march for the millions of Uyghur Muslims being persecuted by the Chinese, because no one else was. They didn't march for the Yemeni Muslims being bombed by the Saudis, because no one else was. And they didn't march for the hundreds of thousands of Syrian Muslims killed by Assad, because no one else was. But in this case, people are marching, so they march.
The majority of them know nothing. I grew up in Israel. I moved here 27 years ago. I've been to explosions, I've been to the shit. None of those people got their info.
I have no idea. It's the next cool thing to do. The average person, I think, at these protests is the kid that isn't cool or good looking enough to be invited to a house party. So because they're not invited to a house party, they make their own, which is out here, which is why what happens when they summon these people with a flyer, 10,000 of them show up. These are 10,000 people with nowhere else to be.
They get to be part of a community. They find meaning where they had none. In their outrage and indignation, they get to feel good about themselves. There are many causes where this mass formation happens. Me Too, pro-abortion, so-called vaccines, free Palestine, transgenderism. Sometimes people jump on board because they believe in it. It gives them meaning and community and makes them feel better about themselves. Others, they jump on board out of fear of what may happen if they don't. And our so-called leaders, they're frightened to confront the threat of Islam. And they're too frightened to even talk or confront the threat of the far left. But don't worry, guys, don't worry. They've just changed the definition of extremism. That'll work, that'll beat it. Of course, not everyone is caught up in this mass formation. Not everyone can be manipulated quite so easily. And not everyone will comply with the government deciding what ideas are correct and telling people what they have to think. So they have to have consequence for dissent, for non-compliance. There has to be a consequence for speaking out. And the government will decide what non-compliance is. The government will decide what you're allowed to say. As the cost of speaking out increases, fewer people are prepared to speak out. Everyone should get the message, and a spiral of submission and compliance should follow. Perfect. Well, that's the theory. But the government know they have to be careful. Make non-compliance costly enough to crush dissent, but not so costly that they create martyrs. Create one Spartacus and you may have a revolt on your hands.
Every day brings new studies, new findings that confirm the last 2 years of life in the Western world as a blizzard of lies.
Keep in mind, Tony Blair is the one who's been advocating for vaccine passports, digital identification through COVID, and all of these measures.
Either we stand for free speech, in which some people will take offence, some people won't, or we don't, right?
There's no scientific evidence. Sadiq Khan rubbished the evidence and had it rewritten to serve his own needs. No one voted it. It's the beginning and bringing in of a surveillance state. And he's trying to make noises so that I can't say that.
Every one of them lost their jobs for the wrong kind of views. And politicians are no exception.
Will the Prime Minister instruct the Department of Education to order schools to stop indoctrinating our children and to concentrate on their duty of care to protect them?
Suella Braverman, Lee Anderson, Andrew Bridgen, they all lost their jobs for challenging the approved government narrative. You may not actually care about the people you've just seen, but it's not actually about them. This targeted persecution, it could land on your doorstep at any time.